So if we go to the end of the Ottoman Empire, close to the end, at the end of the 19th century, when Serbia got officially, recognized its state in 1878, the Serbians feel that in the beginning of the 20th century, they got the Kosovo back as a formal, as an integral part of the Serbian state when it lost it to the Turks in the 1389. Do you feel that is correct, or do you have another opinion?
No, I mean, this is a fabrication of the history and Serbian ideology and the Serbian nationalism and the Serbian propaganda are, in that sense, a special case, like in terms like the Kosovo myth was actually something which was created in the 19th century by the Serbian elite, and which has a single purpose, and the purpose was actually to justify the Serbian expansion to the Albanian territories, not just to Kosovo, but even to the Albanian territories which currently are actually within the Serbian border, like the Preševo Valley. They had a myth which was created about about possible future occupation of Kosovo through them in the 19th century, like the Kosovo myth. They created at the same time a myth called Južna Serbia, and Južna Serbia was actually the territory of today Macedonia, while Stara Serbia was a territory of the today Kosovo. I mean, there are a lot of cases in the history, like how elites are actually fabricating history for political purposes, and this myth was actually created in the 19th century with the single purpose just to legitimate actually the future occupation. Then 1913, the Serbian military troops conquered Kosovo. Mostly this was done actually by motivation of the Kosovo myth, and by saying that they are actually liberating this territory. But I mean, the question is always, what's mean liberation in a territory? Are free people, or it's free a territory? And while the Albanian population was actually the majority here, while in this part of the Albanian-speaking area in Kosovo, they're taking part the most important events to the Albanian national movement, like the Riga of Prizren in 1878, and the biggest events and fights for the creation of the Albanian states. They're actually taking part not within the current borders of Albania today, but basically in Kosovo. The question is, what's mean liberation in that sense? In that sense, the myth of Kosovo as an old Serbian part is actually a typical fabrication of history, and it has been seen always so by the Western scholars. It's something else why Serbia was able actually to support this myth with its military and political hegemony, and it was done until June 1999.
You mentioned Macedonia and Kosovo under the Serbian rule. Do you agree that, under the rule of Tsar Dušan in, I think, 15th century in the medieval Serbia, the Serbian state even covered a piece of today's Greece and Macedonia and, I think, parts of Albania. So, Serbia was, the Serbs were a traditional and autochthonous nation in that region.
Yes, but you cannot mix the things like in a very simple way by saying actually that. I'm using the term occupation in terms of real military occupation for the time after the spread of nationalism among Serbs and among Albanians. I'm not using these terms for the Middle-Age Serbia, because you cannot really interpret the Middle-Age, the so-called Middle-Age states in terms of modern state, because a state at that time doesn't have a clear territory, doesn't have clear people, doesn't have clear political institutions. I mean, what's mean? Simply interpret the Tsar Dusan Empire as a Serbian empire. It's a very wrong approach, you know? It's a very wrong approach even to interpret the Byzantine Empire as a Greek empire. I mean, scholarly and politically, this is actually just narratives of the Yugoslav and Serbian scholars of the 1980. Even in that time, nor in Europe, nor in the Balkans, they're actually empire which somebody can describe to a specific ethnic group, you know?
I want to talk to you about the end of the 20th century. Why wasn't the Albanians in Kosovo pleased or happy with the constitution of 1974, which gave, we can say, a wide autonomy to the Kosovo and Vojvodina region?
Yeah, I mean, first, regarding the 1970s of the constitution, it were actually first Serbs who were not lucky with the constitution. The elites who are running today Serbia, the political elites, Mr. Kostunica was at that time a student at the Belgrade University, and he was very well known for opposing the constitution. The intellectuals in Serbia, like Dobrica Ćosić, they're actually, since this time, opposing the 1974. And there were not Albanians who had first problems with this constitution, but they're actually Serb elite with this constitution. And actually, Yugoslavia, I mean the first Yugoslavia for the Second World War, and the second Yugoslavia, the socialistic Yugoslavia, was nothing else, just a creation of the biggest nation. That meant the Serbs, the Croats, and the Slovens. Then these three big nations felt that this state building is actually an obstacle in their agenda for the national states. Then Yugoslavia was already dead. In that sense, I mean, the way how Kosovo is treating has been treated in 1970s, 1980s, 1990s is actually, again, just a misinterpretation, because there were not Albanians in Kosovo who were founding the states, but basically there are other bigger nations who were founding the states. And basically, then this bigger nation were keen to see these states not to exist more than their elites, their political elites, and the intellectual elite were actually those who were creating new perceptions and offering new agenda what to do with the Yugoslav Federation. The position of Albanians was actually that the process of integration was very short, and this was actually after 1970 then the first steps for the integration were taken. And then the Constitution of 74 was actually the legal clarity for them in the new federative state of Yugoslavia. While after the Tito's death in 1980, and after the students' demonstration in Pristina after 1981, the process of integration was stopped. The Constitution of 1974 was politically dead, and it started in the last phase of, and then it started actually the first phase of peaceful internal disintegration of Yugoslavia, and then after 10 years later, in the 1990s, it started the violent disintegration of Yugoslavia. In that sense, I mean, the role of Kosovo was actually very peripheral in the whole Yugoslav story.